Welcome back to our video series on launching an AI startup in under 28 days. My name is Yanni. I'm a growth partner here at Thinkk. I appreciate you being with us. Today we're going to cover team building. It's one of my favorite parts of building a new company. Team building just refers to hiring people, understanding who to hire, how to hire them, and obviously how to compensate your new team in a way that's respectful and fair to them, but also safe for you. And so before we get started, remember a couple things. Firstly, the source of our credibility comes from two places. The first one is my decade plus in entrepreneurship, founding, running, advising, and investing in different firms. Also, Think's experience advising over 45 different AI startups last year in 2024. And so, everything you're going to hear in these video series stems from a mix of my own personal experience as well as Think's experience. And so, all of this stuff is going to be data driven and proven. The first question when it comes into building a team is who do I hire? It's a great question. And most founders, the minute they start getting overwhelmed, will rush to hire the first person that they can find, whether that's an intern or marketing help or anything else. But the truth is that being overwhelmed in the early stages is actually what gives you the knowledge and the foundation and the building blocks of entrepreneurship. Learning how to run social media, how to design a post, learning how to hire and how to get on a sales call, learning how to build a contract and do all these other things is incredibly important in the early stages. It teaches you everything you need to know. And then when you eventually go to hire, it teaches you what those people need to know and what attributes those people need to have in order to do the role in a great way. And so we found that the magic number when it comes to actually hiring somebody is right when you're hitting around $10,000 per month, at least for a full-time position. You can do a couple little, freelancers and part-time work in the meantime. But when you're really looking for somebody full-time, you want to make sure that you have enough money coming in and you have a proven concept before you're bringing other people into your vision. Most of the times when you're going ahead and hiring somebody new, you're going to hire one of two people. And keep in mind, this pertains mostly to these AI or other digital or coding startups. And so the first one that you might end up looking to hire, if you are more on the technical side already, is somebody like a chief marketing officer. And this is important because the marketing guys are first and front lines when it comes to bringing money into your business. And as we've kind of seen already, it doesn't really matter what your idea is or what your business is, because at the end of the day, you need that to go ahead and get in touch with everybody else. You need other people to learn about it. You need other people to pay you for it, irrespective of what you have going for you outside of that. And so you need to go ahead and get somebody that's on board to do really, really great marketing for you because they're right on the money side of things. The second person that you might think about getting involved in the early stages is going to be a CTO or a technical person. And the reason you might do this is because you're a little bit more marketing savvy or sales savvy already. And so if you're a non-technical founder, getting somebody on board was a little bit more technical. They can sit there and actually build some of the AIs that you guys are looking to do. Go ahead and keep your development costs down because you can reward them with equity and whatnot. This ends up being a pretty good task. And so generally speaking, the question between which one to pick, just as a matter of what you need more. If you already have expertise in the marketing space, go ahead and get somebody to work on your technicals with you. And if you don't have any sort of expertise in the technical space, go ahead and get somebody to do the marketing because bringing money into the business is seriously important. One of the biggest takeaways that you can have in hiring is something that somebody told me a long, long time ago. And that is to not clone yourself because, in truth, you already have enough of yourself. You already have one of yourself. And that's pretty much enough for most people. You're much better off going and getting somebody else who is going to complement the things that you already bring to the table. And so, as you can tell, David Sylvan, a brilliant entrepreneur at University Ventures, he pretty much had told me that he's never been the smartest person in the room, but what he does know how to do is get a lot of really, really brilliant people together and then just give them the resources to succeed. And as you can tell, John F. Kennedy and a few other people have voiced similar things where they pretty much just say, hey, go ahead and hire good people and then just get the hell out of the way. But again, make sure you're not exactly cloning yourself because you already have enough of yourself as is. Let's talk about how to go ahead and compensate your new team. People aren't just going to walk into the door and say, yeah, I'm happy to work for free. Although that surprisingly does happen every once in a while. I think in reality, the situation you're going to be most likely to find is that people are going to want some sort of compensation for giving you their time and their efforts and their expertise. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this as a startup founder. But the one thing to note is that it's going to be very, very difficult to go ahead and compete with larger organizations on salaries unless you're venture backed. And so, at least in the beginning, there's two main forms of compensation that we like to use when bringing people on board to your team. The first one is going to be equity based compensation. And so, equity is going to refer to ownership within the company. You, as a founder, if you started it by yourself, will typically own 100% of that firm. If you have investors, maybe they own a little bit. And if you have advisors, maybe you give them a couple percentage too. But as a general concept, you also are able to use equity to compensate your new team. And so letting people go ahead and take ownership stake in some of these firms is actually something that big firms are not able to do. In other words, if you go work for JP Morgan, there is not a single situation in the entire world that these guys go ahead and give you equity in JP Morgan firm. Or at least not sizable equity to the point where it'll make a serious difference. When you go ahead and get involved in a new startup, however, you might be able to get 5, 10, 15, 50% of the ownership of this company. And the nice thing about equity is that as the company's valuation grows and as these people continue to improve the valuation of the company, their equity stake also grows in value. And so it's a really nice way to compensate people, which is also scalable. Another thing that you can go ahead and do is profit sharing. And so the profit sharing basically just refers to splitting the money that the business is actually making between a few different people. This is a really easy way to compensate people, especially if they're on the marketing or sales side of things. And one of the nice things about profit sharing is that it serves almost as a natural check and balance against overcompensating people. And let me explain it like this. If you bring a marketing person on board and you are going to head and split, let's say you split your profits or they get 30% of your profits or something, what ends up happening is that if they end up spending too much money, if they end up throwing money around everywhere, they spend too much on their ad campaigns and too much creating content, it's naturally going to lower the actual income of the business or the profit of the business. And so, as a natural result, it's going to minimize or decrease the profit share that they end up getting. So, in other words, it serves as a check and balance against overspending with people, just trying to go ahead and get their compensation. The other thing that's nice about profit sharing is that it's actually liquid. And so, although equity is typically illiquid, which means that you go ahead and get it and you can't really convert it into cash very easily, profit sharing is 100% liquid. And surprisingly, a lot of people just want cash. And so, even though people are sometimes interested in getting equity, every once in a while you just find somebody that wants some money in their pockets. And so, you can go ahead and do that with profit sharing. But when you're compensating people, you want to make sure that you're doing this in a way that's smart for you because you are the company's founder and you want to make sure that you don't give too much away to somebody that isn't always deserving of the compensation that they're getting. And there's a couple different ways to do that. The first way that people do that is with something called a vesting schedule. And the second way is with something called cliffs. And typically they're actually used in combination. So there'll be a cliff of, let's say, a certain period of time, and then a vesting schedule, which is typically a little bit longer than that. A vesting schedule almost just refers to a period of time where your equity is just slowly accruing or slowly accumulating. And so it means that you don't necessarily get all of your equity all the way. You can imagine if somebody had a 3-year vest, that it would basically mean that over a period of 3 years, they would finally get to the let's say proposed equity percentage that they're actually owed. And so let's say that you were to give somebody 10% equity and you were going to give them a 4-year vest. They would basically get somewhere around 2.5% the first year. They'd get 5% the second year. On the third year, they'd have 7.5%. And then on year 4, they'd finally get to that 10% that they're owed. And a cliff is one other thing that you can go ahead and incorporate into that. And so a cliff is just basically a period of time before which any equity actually vests. And so a lot of times what you might see is something like a 1-year cliff. And so although the equity is theoretically vesting, if they were to leave any time before the cliff or any time before year 1 in this example, they wouldn't get any of the equity that's actually vested. And so this pretty much just keeps people from showing up, taking your equity, and walking out just a couple of days later with 10 or 15 or 20% of your company. There's also two other things that we love using internally when it comes to hiring people and bringing them on board to your team. And the first one is actually a buyout. And so, what a buyout is basically just a contractual clause that lets you go ahead and buy out one of their agreements that you've gone ahead and signed with somebody. And so, you can imagine that if you were to sign a profit sharing agreement with somebody, you very often, if you want to do things smartly, would go ahead and include a buyout clause in the profit sharing agreement. And what that would let you do is, let's say that you want to go ahead and part ways with this person in a year or two, it would let you actually buy out the clause at whatever that present value of that profit sharing agreement is at the time being. And that way you can remove them, they can still be compensated, and you can go ahead and get that entire thing back. You also have repurchase agreements, which are a similar concept, but typically applied to equity. And so you might actually go ahead and create a repurchase agreement in your equity plans with your employees or anybody else that you bring on board. And what a repurchase agreement will allow you to do is actually go ahead and buy back some of the equity that you give out. This is really nice because it means that if you do decide to let somebody go, or if somebody decides to leave, it lets you go ahead and actually get that equity back so that people don't walk away with it. It's also really nice for team members that want to get involved. But again, given the illiquid nature of equity, want to generate some sort of cash flow. And so what you can let them do with a repurchase agreement is say, hey, I know that I have 2.5%, or I know that I have 5%, or I know that I have 10% equity, but I'd actually like you to repurchase that at the company's current valuation. And so there are multiple ways to do this, but this is one of the best ways that we found. Diving deeper into the nitty gritty of actually getting people on board, what does this look like? Well, it looks like interviewing people and it looks like hiring them. And it's actually a really, really fun process, although it can be a little bit nerve wracking if you've never interviewed somebody before. There's a few different things that we like to focus on here. And the first one is make sure that you're treating your job posting almost like a marketing campaign. In the same way that you want to go ahead and present your business as being something really great when you're advertising or marketing to customers, you want to almost follow a similar approach when you're trying to get other people on board and you're trying to get team members. Remember that typically you are trying to hire very talented people and that those very talented people have a lot of options. And so you want to make sure that you're holding your company to the highest regard. The second thing you want to do is post across multiple platforms. Why? Well, the same way that you would go ahead and market across multiple platforms for your startup. Customers are everywhere, and also people that could work for you are everywhere. And so you want to pick at least maybe one or two or three different platforms to begin with. Something like an Upwork or a Fiverr might be really good for freelancers. You can also use something like Indeed or ZipRecruiter if you're here in the United States, which are typically pretty good for longer term positions. LinkedIn is somewhere in the middle of that. You also want to make sure that you highlight your uniqueness. Again, make sure that you're selling exactly what you're doing. Like, why are you different than the next company that's doing something else? And why should somebody come and work for you? And so, focusing on that opportunity is really important to get people involved and make sure they know exactly what they're committing to. In other words, sell the vision and do a really good job at selling that vision. When you finally get people into the interview process, it's pretty straightforward. And there's a pretty typical step formula that you like to follow. First thing you want to do is you want to set the stage. You want to thank people for walking in. You want to thank people for going ahead and giving you the time. Go ahead and greet them and just build some rapport. Ask them how the weather's doing and all the rest of the typical lazy questions that people like to ask. But then go ahead and tell them how you use your time together. So in other words, go ahead and block it out for people so they know exactly what to expect. The second thing that you do is actually marry your audience. This is a technique that's actually used by the CIA and other intelligence organizations. But as a core, you want to go ahead and just repeat key phrases back to people to show them that you're listening and that you're really paying attention to what they're doing. In other words, if they say, "Yeah, I really enjoy beekeeping down in Texas," whenever they're done speaking, go ahead and say, "So it sounds to me like you love beekeeping down in Texas. Is that a good way? Did I understand you correctly?" And most of the time they'll say, "Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right," and then continue with something else. So it's important to show people that you're listening, and mirroring is one of the ways that you can do that. Another thing to do as a general concept here, and something I'm very passionate about, is don't focus on the resume. The resume is a tool to get somebody into the interview process. It's a piece of paper that lets you quantify somebody down into 500 words. But once somebody's in the interview, go ahead and talk to them. There are way more than 500 words available. And getting to know somebody on a very deep level is actually, in my view, substantially more important than sitting there and just focusing on the one or two or three exaggerated experiences that somebody has on a resume. After all, so much of what you're hiring for is culture and cultural fit. And so it's really, really important to go ahead and get that right. One question that I love asking people when they first get into an interview is, "What's your purpose on earth?" This obviously sets me apart from everybody else who's ever interviewed somebody who obviously just doesn't really care for the people so much as what they could do for them. And it really just gets to the core purpose of like, what do these people want to do? What's their main motivation? And are we going to be a good fit on a general basis? The last thing to talk about is leave time for questions. Most interviewers, unfortunately, will take, let's say that you had a 30-minute interview scheduled, they will take 25 or 28 minutes to go ahead and just run you through the ringer on things. And then they'll give you a few minutes to say, "Do you have any questions?" And every once in a while, maybe you have one or two that are loaded up because you did some research on the company's website or something. I encourage you to scrap this entire format because I don't think it makes any sense. And in fact, if you really want to recruit people to your team, it almost becomes a sales effort. And you have to remember that sales actually requires listening more than it does speaking. And so you want to give people a lot of time to be able to do that. Right in the beginning, when you're setting the stage, tell people that you're going to be asking them a few questions. And then maybe around halfway through or two-thirds of the way through the interview, go ahead and tell them, I want to go ahead and leave 15 or 10 minutes at the end of this. So you can go ahead and ask any sort of questions that you have just to make sure that we're really on the same page here about what you're walking into. And so this tends to be a really good approach and it lets people feel heard and listened to. And also keep in mind, having them understand what the heck is going on is way more important than you understanding what the heck is going on. So again, you want to give them the time of day to go ahead and ask any questions they might have. When it comes down to picking who you are going to end up hiring, it's a pretty straightforward process. But the thing that we like to remember is that, especially in the early stage, you really are hiring for cultural fit. And you have to be selective about who you bring on board. And so, one of the questions I want to ask is, do you genuinely enjoy working with these people? Because if you don't, do not hire them. Can you see yourself working with them for years, or is this something that you see yourself working with them for a little bit of time? If you can only see yourself working for them for a couple months, or working with them for a couple months, you're typically better off just not getting involved with those people at all. Because if your startup goes well, which ideally it will, you're going to have these people on board for the rest of your life, or at least until you end up exiting the company. The last thing that's really important is, do you trust them? Because if you don't trust them, you are pretty much going to be building a pretty bad nest for yourself. And so you want to go ahead and make sure that you have an environment of trust, you have an environment of respect, and that you generally see yourself working with these people longer term. So much of the gains in life come from playing long term games with long term people. And so you want to make sure that that's reflected in your hiring process. Of course, as good as we try to do on the hiring side, sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes that comes down to our own inability to pick people correctly. And sometimes that just comes down to things that are outside of our control, or maybe weren't exactly well versed, or voiced when we went ahead in that interview process. And so when you do have to eventually let somebody go, I want you to remember a couple things. The first one is that these people spent a lot of time and effort contributing to your company and trying to build your vision. And so you want to treat people with respect. That means you don't just fire people right off the bat, but you want to give them one or two tries or one or two chances to say, hey, these are the things you're not exactly doing right. And I'd like to see you go ahead and improve on this. Do you think this is something we can do together? And give those people two genuine tries to go ahead and do that. If that hasn't worked after the second try, at that point, you need to look out for your own company. You need to look out for your investors. You need to look out for your vision's well-being, and you need to let those people go. However, make sure that you give people advance notice to go ahead and correct those flaws, because not any one of them or not each one of those flaws might be fatal. And so, one of the things that you do want to do, however, when you are finally deciding to let somebody go, is you do want to make sure that you take any sort of precautions. And keep in mind, hiring and firing are very emotional experiences. And so, I don't know if anybody's ever been fired here before, but you can imagine that it's flustering and it's frustrating, and you feel some sort of ways about it. And some of those people, unfortunately, aren't going to want what's best for you when they're no longer part of the team. And if they have access to your materials, if they have access to your social media, if they have access to all these things, they might go ahead and really badmouth or trash your company online. And so you want to make sure that you don't do that. You also want to make sure that nobody just goes and says, hey, I have a company credit card. I'm going to go ahead and buy myself a new TV and screw you, right? Because unfortunately, people act irrationally in these situations. So the first thing we recommend doing is go ahead and just lock any sort of access to company accounts and company cards and whatnot. That way, if somebody does have, let's say, an adverse reaction to being let go, that they don't exactly end up in a bad situation. If you have any sort of questions on building a team, who to hire, what it's like to lead a great company, go ahead and book a one-on-one workshop with us. I'll probably be on the workshop myself, since it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I'll also go ahead and make sure that I leave a whole lot of educational materials for you, somewhere around here, maybe in the bio or something, or in the description. That way, you can continue learning for absolutely free, and continue getting great materials at zero cost to you. Thank you very, very much for sharing this time with me. It's really amazing to be able to teach the next generation about one of my favorite topics, which is building an amazing team for your new company. So thank you very much for bopping into how to launch your AI startup in 21 days, or 28 days rather. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much.